Here's a fun fact for you. A standard 55-gallon rain barrel, the kind you get at any hardware store, can hold about 460 pounds of water. According to my homeowners association, it can also hold $9,900 in fines. That wasn't a typo. 99 fines, $100 each, issued over the course of a single week. If you're a regular here on Karenology, you probably know where this is going. It's never just about the rain barrel. My name is Maya, and for the last 15 years, my entire job has been to see disasters coming. I'm a logistics risk assessor. I look at shipping routes, supply chains, and operational plans, and I find the one tiny crack that can bring the whole thing crashing down. I'm paid to be paranoid, and usually I'm good at it. Usually. The first notice arrived on a Monday, stuck to my front door with a piece of tape that left a sticky residue on the paint. The air still smelled of ozone from the morning thunderstorm, that clean, sharp scent of wet asphalt and damp earth. The violation was unauthorized water collection device. I almost laughed. My little green plastic barrel, a threat? I figured it was a mistake, an automated letter spit out by a new, overzealous board member. I tossed it. That was my first mistake. By Friday, I had a stack of them on my kitchen counter. The language grew more aggressive each day. What started as a violation became a persistent environmental hazard. The fine total was staring me in the face, a number so absurd it felt like a prank. I sat there, staring at the paper, my coffee growing cold. In my wallet, I could feel the presence of a small, folded piece of paper I've carried for years. It's a fragment from a letter, the edges blackened and brittle from a fire. Most of the words are gone, but a few remain, written in my old boss's handwriting. That you couldn't have known. But I should have. That's the whole point of my job. A sharp knock on the door pulled me from the memory. I opened it to find two men standing on my porch. One was Mr. Sullivan, the Homeowners Association president, a man who looked like he'd been perpetually disappointed since birth. The other was a man I didn't know. He was in his 50s, wearing a golf shirt so crisp it could have cut glass, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This was Mr. Henderson. Maya, Sullivan began, shuffling his feet. We've been trying to reach you about the situation. Henderson stepped forward, his presence instantly filling the space. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me, at my yard. The situation, he said, his voice smooth as oil, is that your unauthorized structure is disrupting the delicate water balance of our community lake. He jabbed a thumb over his shoulder towards the water, a half-mile down the hill. This isn't just a fine. This is a preliminary warning. You're endangering the ecosystem. I couldn't help it. A dry laugh escaped my lips. The ecosystem? With a rain barrel? Have you ever felt like you've walked into a play where everyone but you has the script? Henderson's smile tightened. He took a step off my porch and walked over to the barrel. He gave it a kick. The sound was a hollow, tinny thud. This is coming down, he said, not as a suggestion, but as a fact. One way or another. He turned and walked back to his golf cart without another word. Sullivan gave me a helpless shrug and scurried after him. I stood in the doorway, the cool evening air raising goosebumps on my arms. This felt different. This wasn't about a rule. This was a declaration of war. If you've ever been on the receiving end of a ridiculous power trip, give that like button a tap. Let me know I'm not alone out here. The very next day, the war went public. A group of 4 young people, all wearing matching bright green vests with Lake Ecological Patrol printed on the back, began walking the neighborhood. They were handing out flyers. On the front was a grainy picture of my house with a big angry red circle drawn around my rain barrel. The headline read, "Is your neighbor stealing your water? One selfish act can ruin it for everyone." I watched from my window as they handed one to my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Davis. She took it, read it, and then slowly looked over at my house, her expression shifting from confusion to concern. The online community forum lit up, posts from anonymous accounts, all with the same breathless panic tone. Maya on Elm Street is hoarding water. Does she want the lake to dry up before summer? I heard she's selling it, I tried to respond, to post the county water usage report, to explain basic hydrology. My posts were either deleted or buried under an avalanche of memes and angry face emojis. It was a coordinated attack, a classic reputational carpet bombing. Henderson wasn't just trying to fine me into submission. He was turning the entire community against me. He was making me the villain in a story he wrote. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept walking to the window, peering out into the dark, quiet street. Around midnight, I saw it. A flicker of movement near the end of my driveway. 2 figures in those same green vests. They weren't handing out flyers now. One of them raised a phone. A small, bright flash illuminated my house for a second. He lowered his phone, gave me a slow, deliberate smile I could see even from a distance, and then he waved. That wave wasn't a greeting. It was a promise. I stood there, frozen in the dark of my living room, the fabric of my curtains clutched in my hand. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that made the familiar neighborhood look alien and hostile. The 2 figures in green vests got back into an unmarked sedan and drove off, leaving only the low hum of the engine hanging in the night air. For a moment, there was just silence, a deep, unsettling quiet that felt heavier than any noise. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I've assessed threats in war-torn countries from the safety of a satellite feed, but this was different. This was my home. The smell of my own lavender bushes by the porch suddenly felt cloying, sickening. I finally let go of the curtain and forced myself to take a breath. Panic is a chain reaction. It starts with a spark of fear and feeds on itself until it burns you down from the inside. I couldn't afford that. Not now. I spent the rest of the night at my kitchen table, a fresh pot of coffee brewing, my laptop open. I wasn't just a target anymore. I was a problem to be solved. My professional instincts kicked in. What was Henderson's angle? It couldn't be the $9,900. That was pocket change for a man who drove a brand new Escalade. This was about something bigger. Control? A precedent? I started digging. The next morning, the answer came in a way I never expected. I turned on the faucet to brush my teeth, and nothing came out. Not a drip. Just a dry, hollow cough from the pipes. A quick check with my neighbors confirmed it. The entire block was dry. And then, at 8:02 a.m. sharp, an email landed in my inbox. It was from the Homeowners Association, a mass message to every resident on my street. It was beautifully worded, full of concern and efficiency. "Dear residents," it began, "we are aware of a significant water main rupture affecting your area. Our primary contractor, Henderson Quality Works, has been dispatched. Due to the severity of the damage, repairs are estimated to take approximately 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I read the words again, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. But here was the kicker, the very next paragraph. For residents enrolled in our Community First Premium Safety Plan, Henderson Quality Works will provide an emergency bypass, restoring water service within 6 hours. Enrollment is open." I clicked the link. The Community First plan costs $5,000 a year, per household. Have you ever been so angry you felt completely calm? That's where I was. This wasn't a disaster. It was a sales pitch. This was extortion, wrapped in the language of civic duty. I walked out onto my front porch and saw the scene repeating itself up and down the street. People in bathrobes, staring at their dry lawns, tapping anxiously at their phones. I saw Mrs. Davis, my elderly neighbor, sitting on her porch steps, her face buried in her hands. She was crying. That broke something in me. This wasn't about my rain barrel anymore. It was about a frail 70-year-old woman being terrified into buying a service she couldn't afford. I grabbed a few cases of bottled water from my garage, walked over, and set them down beside her. She looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "Oh, Maya, I don't know what to do. My medication, I need water." "I know, Mrs. Davis," I said, my voice softer than I felt. "We'll figure this out." But as I said it, I saw Henderson's truck pull up at the end of the street. He got out, clipboard in hand, looking like a vulture circling a fresh kill. He was going door to door, signing people up. He wasn't just fixing a problem. He was profiting from a crisis he had almost certainly created. What would you do in that situation, when the person setting the fire is also the only one selling the water? It's a question that keeps you up at night. I spent the day making calls, to the county water department, to the state regulatory board, to anyone who would listen. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic indifference. Everyone was sympathetic. Everyone agreed it sounded terrible. But it was a private matter, an HOA dispute. Their hands were tied. By late afternoon, I was exhausted and defeated, sitting in the one place I could always think straight, the town library. The air inside was cool and smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Arthur, the head librarian, a man with more wrinkles than the ancient maps he curated, slid a cup of tea onto my table without a word. He'd known me since I was a kid who could barely see over the checkout counter. "You look like you're trying to solve the world's problems, Mia," he said quietly, polishing his glasses. "Just the world on my street," I replied, managing a weak smile. I told him everything: the barrel, the fines, the green-vested eco-patrol, the water main. He listened patiently, nodding. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he shuffled over to a filing cabinet, pulled out a drawer, and came back with a glossy brochure. He laid it on the table. It was an ad for Henderson Quality Works from a year ago. "Funny thing about paper," Arthur said, tapping the brochure. "It remembers. The paper stock, the font, the slightly too bright shade of green ink in the logo. It was identical to the Ecological Patrol flyers." My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. This was a thread, and I knew exactly how to pull it. I thanked Arthur, a new fire burning in my chest. As I was packing up my laptop, a kid I recognized from the neighborhood, Jake, came over to my table. He was buzzing with energy, holding up his phone. "Check it out, Maya. I was practicing kickflips last night right where the pipe burst. Got the whole thing on video. The sound is messed up, though." He hit play. The footage was shaky, just a patch of dark pavement under a streetlight. But then I heard it. Underneath the clatter of his skateboard, there was another sound, a high-pitched mechanical whine that rose to a scream and then stopped. A sound I knew all too well. I looked at Jake, then back at the screen. The sound wasn't messed up. It was evidence. That sound. It cut through the library's quiet hush like a surgeon's scalpel. It wasn't the groan of stressed metal or the rumble of shifting earth. I've spent hundreds of hours listening to audio files of industrial accidents, training my ear to distinguish the signature of a catastrophic failure from the noise of normal operations. This was no failure. This was clean, deliberate, and brutally efficient. It was the sound of a high-torque pipe cutter slicing through ductile iron. It was the sound of sabotage. "Jake, can you send me that?" I asked, keeping my voice as level as I could. The excitement was a hot bubble in my chest, threatening to rise. "Sure," he said, already tapping at his phone, oblivious. "It's a shame the clip is ruined, right? That whine is so annoying." Ruined. That's a good way to put it. I watched the file download to my laptop, my mind racing. The flyer from Arthur proved a link in materials. Jake's video provided a link in action. This was no longer just a theory, it was a structure, a framework of facts I could build on. Henderson wasn't just an opportunist. He was an arsonist selling fire insurance. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time: certainty. For a woman who deals in risk, certainty is the rarest and most valuable commodity. My first move was to organize a neighborhood meeting, not an official homeowners association meeting, in their clubhouse, where Henderson and Sullivan controlled the microphone. A real meeting. I booked the basement of the library for the next evening and went door to door. I didn't show them the video. I didn't mention sabotage. Not yet. That was my ace in the hole. I just talked to them. I talked about the 3-week repair time, about the $5,000 safety plan, about Mrs. Davis and her medication. I talked about solidarity. Some doors slammed in my face. A few people already loyal to Henderson told me I was making things worse, but most listened. I saw the same spark of anger in their eyes that I felt in my own gut. They were scared, but they were also tired of being pushed around. By the time I was done, I had 12 families on my side, 12 out of the 15 affected houses. It wasn't a landslide, but it was a start. It was hope. The meeting was tense. The air in the library basement was thick with anxiety and the faint smell of old books and damp concrete. People were scared of the cost, scared of Henderson, scared of being without water for weeks. I laid out a simple plan. We would pool our resources, not to pay Henderson, but to hire our own independent plumber to assess the damage and give us a real quote. We'd document everything. We'd present a united front. Mrs. Davis was there, sitting in the front row. She had become a quiet symbol for all of us. When it came time to agree, she was the first to raise her hand, her frail arm held high and steady. Her courage was contagious. One by one, other hands went up. We were a coalition. We had a plan. We had power. For the first time in a week, I felt like we were winning. Have you ever felt that moment when the tide finally starts to turn? It's a feeling better than any drug. That feeling lasted for exactly 12 hours. The next afternoon, as I was coordinating with a plumber from the next town over, I got a call from one of my neighbors. His voice was shaking. "Maya, you need to see this." I walked outside. A small crowd had gathered at the end of the street, where Henderson's crew had dug a massive hole around the ruptured pipe. Standing in the middle of it all, next to a beaming Henderson, was Mrs. Davis. She was holding a pen. In front of her, on the hood of Henderson's truck, was a contract, the Community First Safety Plan. She was speaking to a local news reporter, a young woman with a microphone and a cameraman in tow. "I was so scared," Mrs. Davis said, her voice trembling just enough to sound completely genuine. "I was confused. But Mr. Henderson, he explained everything. Some people," she said, and for a split second her eyes flickered towards my house. "Some people just want to cause trouble. They don't understand how serious this is. I feel so much safer now." She signed the contract with a flourish. The camera zoomed in on her signature. Henderson put a fatherly arm around her shoulder. He was the hero, the savior of the elderly. And I was the troublemaker, the selfish neighbor who had tried to stop a poor old woman from getting the water she desperately needed. It was a masterstroke, a public execution. He hadn't just defeated me, he'd used my own compassion as the weapon. The crowd of neighbors who had been with me last night wouldn't meet my eyes. Their short-lived rebellion had evaporated. They were shuffling over to Henderson's truck now, pulling out their checkbooks. One by one, my coalition crumbled. I stood there, alone on my lawn, the grass cool and damp under my feet. The cost wasn't just financial anymore. The 12 families who signed up with Henderson that day represented $60,000 in his pocket. But the real currency he had just stolen was trust. And that was a debt I didn't know how to repay. I felt the old, familiar ghost of failure settle on my shoulders, cold and heavy. I looked at my house, at my useless rain barrel, and then back at the laughing, victorious face of Mr. Henderson. He had me. He had me completely. He raised his hand and gave me that same slow wave from the other night. This time, it wasn't a promise. It was a checkmate. That wave, it hit me harder than a physical blow. Checkmate. The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my own head. The neighbors were gone, the news crew was packing up, and all that was left was the sight of Henderson, triumphant, and me, standing on my lawn like a statue of defeat. The air, which had smelled of damp earth and coming rain, now just smelled of exhaust fumes from the departing news van. My shoulders slumped. It's a funny thing, despair. It's not a sharp pain. It's a dull, heavy weight that presses down on you until you can barely breathe. I retreated into my house, the screen door slamming behind me with a sound that felt entirely too final. For an hour, I just sat there. I didn't move. I just stared at the wall, at the patterns in the plaster, at anything other than the problem I couldn't solve. The fragment of the burned letter in my wallet felt like it was scorching a hole through the leather. You couldn't have known. The words that were meant to absolve me had become an indictment. I was an expert in seeing what others missed, and I had missed this. I had walked right into Henderson's trap, and I'd dragged my neighbors in with me. The worst part? I had given them hope, only to have it snatched away. False hope is crueler than no hope at all. Have you ever hit a point where you just want to quit, to sell the house, pack a bag, and just disappear? I was there. I was right there on the edge. I pulled up a real estate website on my laptop. I could be gone in a month, start over somewhere new, somewhere no one knew my name, somewhere there was no homeowners association run by a sociopath. But then my eyes fell on the rain barrel, still standing defiant in my yard. It was such a stupid thing to fixate on, a $50 piece of green plastic, but it wasn't just a barrel anymore. It was a symbol. It was the hill I was apparently going to die on. Quitting meant letting Henderson win. It meant letting him do this to the next person and the next. And I realized something. My guilt over that past failure, the one that had haunted me for years, it wasn't going to be exercised by running away. It could only be balanced by a victory here and now. I closed the real estate tab. The feeling of despair didn't vanish, but something shifted underneath it. A hard, cold nugget of anger began to form. Anger at Henderson, anger at myself, Anger is a powerful fuel. It burns clean and hot. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a problem that Henderson hadn't solved yet. My brain, finally free from the paralysis of defeat, started working again. I had been trying to fight him on his terms, in his arena, the meeting, the coalition, the appeal to community. He was a master of that game, a puppeteer pulling social strings. I needed to change the game. I needed a new arena, one where his rules didn't apply. I'm a risk assessor. My job is to find the alternate route when the main road is blocked. I had been looking at the road. It was time to look at the map. The thought hit me with the force of a physical impact. The water. The entire conflict was about the water. Henderson controlled the main line. But was it the only line? I pulled up satellite maps of the area, cross-referencing them with old county surveys I found in the library's digital archives. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This was my world. Data, logistics, infrastructure. And that's when I saw it. About a half-mile north of our subdivision, there was a piece of land zoned for agricultural use. It belonged to an old farmer, a man named Johnson. I knew him vaguely. He was a friend of my late father's. The property was dormant, but the record showed it still had an active well and a commercial-grade irrigation pump. It was a completely separate water system, grandfathered in before the subdivision was even a blueprint. It was an island, an independent variable. It was a long shot, a crazy, desperate, maybe this will work kind of plan. It would involve trespassing, questionable plumbing, and relying on the goodwill of a man I hadn't spoken to in a decade. It was risky. It was complicated. It was perfect. I grabbed my keys and my jacket. The sun was setting, painting the sky in angry strokes of orange and purple. As I walked to my car, I saw Henderson's truck parked down the street. He was still there, observing. He wanted to watch me squirm. I met his gaze, held it for a long second, and then, for the first time that day, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was all teeth. Let him watch. He was looking at the wrong part of the board. While he was celebrating his checkmate, I was about to flip the whole table over. I got in my car, the engine turning over with a satisfying roar. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. The drive to Johnson's farm felt like crossing a border into another country. The manicured lawns and identical mailboxes of my neighborhood gave way to cracked asphalt, then gravel, then finally a dirt road flanked by fields of sleeping corn. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp soil and diesel fuel. I found him in his barn, a cavernous space filled with the shadows of silent machinery. He was a tall, stooped man in his late 60s, with hands like worn leather and eyes that had seen more seasons than I had years. He was fixing a tractor engine, the beam of a single work light cutting through the dusty air. "Maya," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't sound surprised to see me. "Your father was a good man, always said you had more brains than sense." "He was probably right, Mr. Johnson," I said. "I'm here because I need to borrow some of that lack of sense." I laid out the whole story, the fines, Henderson, the water main, the $5,000 shakedown. I didn't embellish or plead. I just stated the facts, logistically, the way I would in a risk report. I ended by showing him the map on my phone, the glowing dot of his, well, a half mile from my parched street. "You have a pump," I said. "A commercial-grade irrigation pump. I need to run a line from it, a temporary off-the-books line." He was silent for a long time, just looking at the screen, then at me. I could hear the buzz of insects outside, the creak of the old barn settling. I expected him to laugh, to tell me I was crazy, to send me on my way. Instead, he just nodded slowly. "Henderson," he grunted, the name tasting like something foul. His father tried to pull the same stunt with zoning laws back in the 90s. Some apples don't fall far from the tree. They just get rotter. He led me to the back of the barn and pulled a dusty tarp off a pallet stacked high with thick coiled hoses. Fire-grade, canvas-wrapped feeder hoses. "Got these at a surplus auction years ago," he said. "Never found a use for them, until now." We spent the next 4 hours working under the cold, white light of the moon. It was back-breaking work. We ran nearly 3,000 feet of hose, connecting them end to end, hiding the line in the deep drainage ditch that ran along the old service road behind the neighborhood. It was a crude, ugly solution, a Frankenstein's monster of plumbing, but it was our solution. Around 3 a.m., we made the final connection to a spigot on the back of my house. Johnson walked back to the pump house on his property. "Give me a minute to build up pressure," he yelled over the sound of the crickets. I stood there in my backyard, my hands raw, my clothes covered in mud, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Was this insane? Absolutely. Was it going to work? I had no idea. Then I heard it. A groaning shudder from the pipes inside my house. A wheeze, a cough, and then a gush. Water. Clear, cold, beautiful water poured from the hose in my hand. It wasn't a torrent, just a steady, life-giving stream. I stood there, laughing like a mad woman, letting the water run over my hands, washing away the dirt and the defeat. We had done it. We had created our own water main. The next morning, the effect was immediate and seismic. I ran a garden hose from my house to the yard of my one remaining ally, a quiet accountant named Sam, who had refused to sign with Henderson out of sheer stubborn principle. Now he had water too. The sight of our 2 green lawns and the sound of our sprinklers in a street of brown, thirsty yards was a more powerful statement than any flyer. People started emerging from their houses, staring. Henderson's truck was parked at the end of the street, as it always was. He got out, his face a thundercloud. He marched down the street, right up to my property line. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dangerously low. "It's called resourcefulness," I said, leaning against my porch rail, a mug of fresh coffee in my hand. "You should look it up." He stared at the hose running to Sam's yard, then back at me. I could see the gears turning in his head, the confusion warring with his rage. He had built a cage, and I had just walked out of it. He didn't know how, and it was driving him insane. This was my arena, a battle of logistics, and he was completely, utterly out of his depth. But I had underestimated his capacity for spite. He couldn't attack my water source because he didn't know where it was, so he attacked the only thing he could see. Later that day, a tow truck arrived, acting on an anonymous tip to the homeowners association. They towed my car. The violation? Parking on an unapproved surface. 2 wheels had been on the grass of my own lawn. It was petty. It was vindictive. It was a message. And as I watched my car get hauled away, a final bill for the tow and the fines landing in my mailbox an hour later, I knew this wasn't over. I had bypassed his trap, but now he was just going to set a new one. The problem was, I had no idea what it would be. The tow truck was a declaration. It was Henderson telling me, in the clearest language he knew, that if he couldn't beat me on the main battlefield, he would bleed me dry with 1,000 tiny cuts. The fine was another $500. The impound fee was $200. It was nothing to him, but for me, it was another dip into savings that were already dwindling. I paid it, my jaw tight, my hands shaking with a rage that had no outlet. I was winning the battle of wits, but I was losing the war of attrition. That evening, I sat with Sam, my accountant neighbor, going over the numbers, the fines, the legal consultations I'd had to pay for, the impound fees. The total was staggering. "He's running a classic financial squeeze play," Sam said, pushing his glasses up his nose. The light from his desk lamp glinted off the lenses, hiding his eyes. "He knows he can't shut off your water, so he's going to make it too expensive for you to live here. He'll bury you in fines, liens, and legal fees until you're forced to sell." He was right. I had outsmarted Henderson, but I hadn't defeated him. I had built a bypass, but he still owned the main road. The feeling of victory I'd savored was already turning sour, replaced by the cold dread of a looming, unwinnable war. My small act of rebellion had provided water, but it hadn't provided a solution. And it had made me a bigger target than ever. I went back to the library. Arthur was waiting, a pot of tea already steeping on his desk. He had that look on his face, the one that said he knew more than he was letting on. "You're looking at the pipes, Maya," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You should be looking at the plumber." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. It was a town registry from 20 years ago. He flipped through the brittle, yellowed pages until he found the business listings. He pointed a crooked finger at an entry. "Henderson Quality Works," it read, and underneath, in smaller print, "Proprietor William Henderson, Henderson's father." "He went bankrupt in '98, Arthur said. "Bad investments, cut corners on a county project. The town revoked his contractor's license for life. He was never allowed to bid on a public or private utility contract in this state again." I stared at the page, the words blurring. "But Henderson is the sole exclusive contractor for our homeowners association. It's in our bylaws." "Is it?" Arthur asked, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Or is it Henderson Quality Works? The company name is clean, but the man running it, he inherited more than just his father's business name. This was it. The crack in the foundation, the fatal flaw. Henderson wasn't a licensed utility contractor. He was likely operating under the umbrella of his father's old, now defunct license. Or, more likely, no license at all. The entire exclusive provider clause in our HOA bylaws was built on a fraudulent premise. He wasn't just unethical, he was illegal. But how to prove it? A 20-year-old registry wasn't enough. I needed something current, something official, and I needed to expose it in a way he couldn't spin or deny. I couldn't just post it on the community forum. He'd have it deleted in seconds. I couldn't go to the news. He had already painted me as the villain. I needed a stage. I needed a captive audience. I went home, my mind spinning. The video from Jake's phone, the audio of the pipe cutter. It was my only piece of hard evidence of sabotage. I spent hours with audio editing software, isolating the sound, cleaning it up, amplifying it. The high-pitched whine was unmistakable now. It was raw, industrial, and violent. I sent the clean audio file to 3 different independent plumbing and engineering firms, all out of state. I simply asked them, "What is this sound?" The replies came back within hours. They were all identical. "That is the sound of a Rothenberger-style industrial pipe cutter operating under high torque." The third email had an addendum that made my blood run cold. "This tool is extremely specialized. In this state, there are only 4 companies that have one registered in their inventory. It's not something you rent for the weekend." He listed the 4 companies. The third name on the list was Henderson Quality Works. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place. It was a beautiful, terrifying picture of methodical, premeditated fraud. I now had the motive, extortion, the method, sabotage, and the means, the pipe cutter. And I had the leverage, his illegal operational status. I called for another meeting. This time, I didn't book the library. I sent out a formal, official-looking email to every single resident of the subdivision, invoking a clause in the bylaws that allowed a member to call an emergency assembly with 10 signatures. I had gotten them from the families who had been forced to pay him. The subject of the meeting: a review of HOA vendor contracts and community safety protocols. I booked the largest room we had access to, the middle school gymnasium, and I sent a special hand-delivered invitation to Mr. Henderson. I told him his attendance was mandatory to discuss the ongoing infrastructure crisis. I knew he wouldn't be able to resist the chance to gloat in front of the whole community. He was walking into my arena now, a stage I had built just for him, and the entire town was about to have a front row seat. The curtain was about to go up on the final act. The school gymnasium smelled of floor wax and old sweat, a scent that transported me straight back to my own awkward teenage years. But tonight, there was another smell in the air. Tension. It was palpable, a low-frequency hum of anxiety and resentment. Nearly the entire neighborhood was there, crammed onto the hard wooden bleachers under the harsh fluorescent lights. They looked tired, angry, and defeated. Henderson had taken more than their money. He'd taken their sense of security. Henderson himself was in his element. He stood at a podium at the center of the basketball court, flanked by a crestfallen-looking Mr. Sullivan. He was dressed in another one of his pristine golf shirts, looking every bit the confident, capable leader. He was basking in the attention, soaking up the authority. He had just finished a long, condescending speech about community responsibility and the unfortunate but necessary costs of maintaining our property values. He was now opening the floor to questions, a smug, magnanimous smile on his face. This was his victory lap. That was my cue. I walked down from the bleachers, my footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet gym. Every eye in the room turned to me. I could feel their hostility, their blame. To them, I was still the troublemaker. Henderson's smile widened. "Ah, Maya," he said into the microphone, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Do you have another complaint for us?" "Not a complaint," I said, my voice clear and steady. "A question about safety." I walked up to the podium and placed my phone on it, connected to the gym's powerful sound system. "A few weeks ago, our water main ruptured. You told us it was an accident, a result of aging infrastructure. I'd like to play something for the community. It's a sound that was recorded at the site of the rupture, on the night it happened." Before he could object, I hit play. The sound filled the cavernous space. That high-pitched screaming whine. It was brutal, alien, and utterly mechanical. It went on for 10 seconds, then stopped, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. People shifted uncomfortably on the bleachers. They didn't know what it was, but they knew it wasn't the sound of an accident. "I've been a risk analyst for 15 years, I said, turning to face the crowd. "I've heard a lot of things break. That is not the sound of a pipe failing. That is the sound of a pipe being cut." I let that hang in the air for a moment. I sent this audio to 3 independent engineering firms. They all said the same thing. It's an industrial pipe cutter, a very specific, very expensive tool, a tool that only 4 companies in this state are registered to own. I turned back to Henderson. His face had lost its color. The smug smile was gone, replaced by a tight, rigid mask. "One of those companies," I said, my voice dropping, "is Henderson Quality Works. You don't sell safety, Mr. Henderson. You sell the disasters you create." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Henderson was a fighter. He grabbed the microphone. "This is absurd. This is a baseless accusation from a disgruntled resident. She has no proof." "Proof?" I asked. I nodded to Arthur, who was standing by the entrance. He opened the doors, and 2 men in official county uniforms walked in. They were from the state licensing board for contractors. "I also did some digging into your company's license to perform utility work," I announced, my voice booming through the speakers. "And it turns out you don't have one. Your father's was revoked 20 years ago for fraud, and you never got one of your own. Every contract you've signed, every dollar you've taken from this community has been illegal." That was the kill shot. The crowd erupted. The uniformed officers approached the podium. It was over. The lie, so carefully constructed, had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. In the end, Henderson took a deal. To avoid criminal charges for fraud and sabotage, he agreed to repay every dollar he had taken from our community. The community first fees, the inflated repair costs, every last fine. He also performed the repairs on the entire neighborhood's water system for free under the supervision of a court-appointed engineer. Then he and his company disappeared from our town for good. The Homeowners Association was restructured from the ground up. We rewrote the bylaws, established transparent bidding processes, and put real power back into the hands of the residents. My neighbors, once my accusers, now treated me with a sort of awkward, respectful deference. A few days after the meeting, I was standing in my yard, looking at my little green rain barrel. Mrs. Davis walked over, a fresh-baked apple pie in her hands. She didn't say anything. She just handed me the pie, squeezed my arm, and walked away. It wasn't an apology, but it was enough. I won. But victory isn't a clean, simple thing. It leaves scars. The trust in my community is still fragile. And me? I looked at that burned fragment of a letter one last time. You couldn't have known, maybe not then. But I knew now. I knew how to fight back. I knew that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to find its weakest point and push until it shatters. I took the charred piece of paper, tore it into tiny pieces, and let them scatter in the wind like seeds.